Okay, committee, good morning. Call the meeting to order. Welcome back, everyone, to Senate Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife. Sue, would you please take roll?
Senator Boner.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Here.
Senator Jones.
Here.
Senator Schuler.
Here.
Chairman Landon.
I'm here too. Thank you, Sue.
Mr. Chairman, you
Appreciate
have
that.
a quorum.
Okay, committee, this morning, we have on the docket Senate File 88, the 2025 Large Project Funding Bill. Each and every one of us have been through this track before, so you know what's up. And this is always a good morning to kind of reflect on all the work that's going on out there. Appreciate Director Bud, you being here. And it was a pleasure to serve with you on that select committee these past couple of years. It's been just a wonderful experience. We've had some good trips. Director, tell us about the large project funding bill this morning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Bob Budd, Director, Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust. There are several handouts that I gave you, and I'll kind of walk through those if I may. First, there's a few things I'd like to point out from the last year. The first is that we had 77 projects in 2024, which was the most we've had since 2012. A huge number of really good projects, and as you can see, a large number of large projects. Those represented $29 million in grants. That's the most we've ever done in a year. 9.6 million of that was invasive grasses, which the legislature told us to do a year ago. That money was all put on the ground in the same year as the budget appropriation was made. There was 6.2 million in here for migration and crossings. That's the highway between Kemmer and I-80 east of Evanston. And that has depleted both of those appropriations. So the money that was appropriated 3 years ago for crossings is now completely allocated, and the money that was done last year for invasives is completely allocated. And in fact, in both of them, the board ended up putting additional funding in above and beyond what the legislature did. The main projects were pretty much the way it's always been. River restoration, conservation easements, rangeland restoration, invasive species. Those were 61 of the 77 projects fell into those categories. The other thing that I think is impressive is that the leverage was 5.1 to 1 across the board for these. So for every state dollar that's put in, there's $5 and a dime coming from other sources. And those are not just federal sources. They're private, they're landowner contributions and others. So, and lastly, I want to do a shout out to my board. I have a fabulous board, 9 citizens who actually, it's a working board. They roll their sleeves up, they get out on the ground. You've almost all of you have been out with us before, and you know what they're like. They dig into these projects. They do a phenomenal job, and that's why we can operate with 2 staff people and run a $29 million program, because we got 9 fantastic board members. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to walk through the projects we have this year.
So Director, real quickly, our ability to stand up 77 projects in 1 year, part of that is due to the fact that we finally were able to get that corpus up where we targeted years ago, right?
Right.
And I think that took place 2 or 3 years ago, is that right?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct, and that is a game changer.
Yeah,
Yes.
appreciate that. I just wanted to point that out. Please continue. Any other questions before we get started, committee? Okay, thanks, Director.
So the large projects this year, the first is the Thunder Basin Habitat Project. This is a broad-based landscape type project. You're going to see a bunch of those in here. It includes fence modification to allow for wildlife movement, restoration of gullies using Z-dike structures, removal of invasive conifers, treatment of invasive annual grasses, and in some cases, seeding and restoration of those rangelands to provide habitat. The primary species are mule deer, antelope, elk, sage grouse, tons of grassland birds. And as always, you have benefits that come back in the form of water quality, native vegetation, and ecosystem health. The project is 2.1 million total. The request for 620,000. That review was done by J.D. Williams and I, and recommended full funding on it. So that's the first large project that we have. Happy to answer any questions about that one.
Senator Hicks.
Bob, on some of these projects, how long is this project projected before they've completed? Is it a 1 year, 2 year, 3 years? Is this a phase project?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, as you are very well aware, most of these end up being phased. This is phase one. We've done some one-offs up in the Thunder Basin over the years that were fairly small. This one is considerably bigger. We're talking 50,000 acres here. And not every acre that 50,000 gets treated. That's the whole area that is out there. It will morph. The success of the projects breeds other projects, and that will morph into probably phase 2, 3, or 4. I can't tell you right now how many it'll be. A lot of that depends on how available funds. So, they may come in with a 3-year timeline and we don't have the resources to do it in 3. We may bump that out to 4, and you're certainly familiar with that. But
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
how long do you anticipate phase one will take to implement?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, we write our contracts for 3 years. We usually try to get them done in 2. Some will be done in 1. This one I would expect will be done in 2.
And then what's the land ownership distribution within this project? Any ideas?
Mr. Chairman,
Some of this is going on with the national grasslands.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, as you know, the Thunder Basin is a little scattered. The bulk of it's private, but there are state lands and federal lands that are included. We tend to be fairly blind to land ownership. If we do a BLM project, they may be the sponsor, but they are also treating on private. If we're working with a conservation district, it'll be on all lands. What we do try to make absolute certain of is that everybody has skin in the game. So the Forest Service in this case would have money that they would put in for their share of the treatments. But we would do the treatments as one and not try to do Forest Service, you do yours, BLM, you do yours, state, you do yours. It's much more efficient if we take it, build it into a single program. And in this case, Willow Bish is in charge, working with the Thunder Basin Prairie Ecosystem Association. It just works like a charm.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. Director, please continue.
The second is very similar. This is the Baggs Valley Headwaters. This is phase 4 of that project. This one is on approximately 6,000 acres within a landscape, again, of tens of thousands of acres. It's a continuation, obviously it being number 4, and primarily it's to restore and enhance shrublands in south central Wyoming. I've been on this project, I think 4 times, I believe, Senator Hicks. And it's impressive when you get out there and see what happens as far as leader growth on desirable species. This one is really critical for deer. And you'll all recall the winter we had a couple of years ago. It just whacked the deer population throughout Wyoming, and particularly in this area, by providing good, high-quality forage for them. It gives us a jump start on rebuilding those herds. And this fall, when I was down there, the deer that were there were fat. That's what you want to see, is those does going into the winter really fat. Their survivability and their fawn survival is much better. So it really works. There are other species that benefit. Elk, you can kind of put elk on anything in state Wyoming right now, but moose, Columbia sharp-tailed grouse, which is one that people don't realize that we have in this state. There's one little pocket of them down there in that Baggs country, and it's a pretty special species. They're a long ways from where they're normally thought to be. They're doing quite well, and they live in concert with sage grouse. So that's just kind of a unique component of this one. Any questions on that, Mr. Chairman? I'd be happy to answer.
So remind me, Director, this, the Baggs Valley Headwaters, is this, so this is the 3rd rendition of this? 4th phase, yeah, thank you. Okay.
Ready for the next?
Please continue, absolutely.
Kimmer 189 migration, that's the one that I mentioned in my opening remarks. This is a $31+ million project. It's a grant a competitive grant that YDOT was able to get. The state requirement is a 20% match. That was what the legislature put in 10 million for a few years ago, was to have that available. This one will be a number of underpasses and one overpass, and then the appurtenant fencing to keep animals off the highway. A lot of times we get people who say, well, why is that important? Well, it's important because if you go back a few years when we did the Bags one, the 2 underpasses in Bags, prior to that, and the ones at Dry Piney, the collisions were a deer a day. And the average property damage to those at that time, which now you can move it forward with inflation, was between $5,000 and $10,000 per accident that was reported. That doesn't count for the ones that hit them, drove home, and pulled the fender out by themselves. And then you add to that the value of those deer herds. You talk about 365 doe deer or 365 deer a year. That's a major impact on a deer herd. You can put it in the context if that was your cow herd, that wipes you out. So that's why they're important. There's human safety, there's property damage, and there's wildlife, retaining wildlife. So,
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to thank you for that project. It's been needed. We have a lot of folks from Evanston that drive back and forth to the
Right.
mines. And I actually had a nephew over there that actually hit a deer, totaled his vehicle. But we heard it all the time, that just lots and lots of migration and lots of, accidents. And so this is so needed. And so I just appreciate it and wanted to say that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Schuler. And I neglected to mention that with the Natrium plant going in at Kemmer and with some of the other activities, that's usually where these suddenly rise up. And that was true when we looked at the Little Snake River Valley. That was true in Nugget Canyon. It's true of Dry Piney. You suddenly have all this industrial traffic in addition to workers moving back and forth. It's why it's become a priority in Teton County. Now, you've got people going over Teton Pass, and you'll recall a few years ago, we actually did fencing and diversion and underpasses up there to deal primarily with moose. So it's a much bigger thing when it comes human safety when you add on something like the Natrium plant. So appreciate that very much.
So Director, the Dry Piney project, I can imagine, like you said, over 300 deer a year were being killed along that stretch. And I don't know if anybody keeps any numbers now, but I'm sure it's knocked it way down, right? I mean.
Mr. Chairman, the reduction is stunning. And again, the last numbers I have that are credible would be when we did the Bags work and we went from 300 deer a year to like 4.
Yeah.
And you'll get a few that'll get in there, but it's just a complete game changer for the species.
Thank you. Please continue.
The next project is Wind River Front cheatgrass. I really do want to shout out to Fremont County Weed and Pest and Aaron Foster. This is probably one of the best thought out projects that we've seen. We had the privilege of the entire board going on this site visit this year just because it coincided with our meeting in Lander. It's about a $3.5 million project. The request is $883,000. Great leverage, 3-to-1. This is a cooperative project between all of the federal land agencies, both of the tribes, private landowners, and state land. And it runs from basically Bull Lake clear down to Red Canyon. So as you look around these photos on the wall here, you can think that's the scale that this project is addressing. It's critical because if you'll recall, if you think on the northern end, you get up to Bull Lake and on the reservation, the issues we had there with feral horses, that actually helped cheatgrass grow. So now that we've dealt with the horse issue and you're getting the bighorn sheep herds back onto the range that they historically used in the winter, you're getting the horses off that summer range, treating this cheatgrass is the next critical step to bringing that ecosystem back. And you're starting to see more deer, certainly more sage grouse. The sheep are in better shape and that's a very good, robust sheep herd. So it hits a lot of species. And then it carries on right on down across the North Fork, across that Lander Front, Table Mountain, a bunch of crucial habitat areas. So it's a really good project, but a shout out to Fremont County. They have done a tremendous job here.
Thank you, Director. Please continue.
Next is a Seminole Shirley habitat. This is the second phase to Senator Hicks' question about how these build up. This one is, again, a joint project, well leveraged at 3.91. It's a combination of funding as well. So there's some funding in this has come from the Gateway West transmission line funds that BLM required mitigation, which we had managed for them. It combines with the Medicine Bow Conservation District, with the federal agencies and others. It's a project that, like the one I mentioned earlier, Thunder Basin, it addresses a lot of different things. It addresses erosion, it addresses invasives, it addresses invasive conifers. So it's a full range of ecological services that are provided out there. The beneficiaries are the usual suspects: mule deer, antelope, sage grouse. You think about Shirley Basin in central Wyoming, that's what this area is. So another really good project, game and fish.
Please continue.
Next
Director,
is,
thank
and
you.
I'm not gonna try and make a noise like this acronym, but it's the Northeast Wyoming Invasive Grasses Working Group. This is another impressive project. Some of you will recall a few years ago, the governor appointed an invasive task force. One of the recommendations from that task force was that counties should work together, not think about county lines as a boundary, but instead think about what they're doing. This one is Campbell, Crook, Johnson, Sheridan, all counties all working together. It'll be administered by Sheridan County Weed and Pest. But we met on this site visit with all of them and talked about, they've prioritized the areas that will be treated. This one is Medusa head, ventonata, and cheatgrass, but it primarily be Medusa head and ventonata. They have that mapped. They're working with the University of Wyoming Extension to map the areas that, and then rank them as high priority, medium priority, and lower priority so that they could do that. This one is the first phase. There will be more to come behind this, but this is what they knew, that they had helicopter bandwidth and they had the ability to get chemical back to do that this year. So this is one of the first big ones that are a result of the appropriation made by the legislature last year for invasives.
Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, Bob, I see the next one's also kind of a cheatgrass thing. And so the question is, with the money that we put in there and with all the different entities, what's the coordination through the Wyoming Weed and Pest Council and the Department of Agriculture as far as, arranging helicopters and then primarily purchasing chemical? Is there any opportunity that we get additional discounts by working through that organization and doing bulk purchases? We're doing this all over the state.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I'm glad you brought that up. I probably should have. We work directly with the Department of Ag and with the Weed and Pest Council, almost on a daily basis. So they're very well, they're in the middle of this. They work with these cooperatives that have been stood up. We still, I think the beauty is that the authority and the putting the boots on the ground is still a county function, which it should be. Government closest to the people is always the best. And these are good examples, these projects, of that being a reality. That said, last year we worked with the manufacturer, Rejuvra. They give a significant discount for pre-ordering, which also assures that you have the chemical. And on top of that, we are now going to receive a 4 or 5% rebate back to the trust to put into invasive control for every bit of Rejuvra sold in the state of Wyoming. And that we should see that check coming in probably in the next 60 or 90 days. So the answer is yes, we have worked with the companies, we have gotten some discounts, and we've gotten a rebate back that will allow us to continue to move forward because we're nowhere near done with this. But yeah, thank you for that.
So, Director, I'm sure that almost, I'm looking out around the room and everybody's pretty well aware of this, but maybe those streaming in, not so much. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about this invasive species issue, even all the way over on the Western Front. And I know that's a big concern of yours. Where do we stand? I worry a little bit about the headlines we're reading in this session. I'm just wondering how those conversations went up through the fall with our executive branch. How are we doing on the appropriations front? This is something I think we need to keep the accelerator down. Hopefully we'll be able to do that, but can you just speak to what we're running into out there?
Mr. Chairman, there's two pieces to it. The first is that we asked for the remaining 11 million. If you recall last year, the request from the governor for invasive annual grasses was 20 million. As is the process in this building, we ended up with 9 million. That was not a surprise. I mean, that was.
Those guys on appropriations, you just can't trust them.
Well, it was not a surprise. That was 1 year of the biennium. We get that and certainly accept that. And then your last minute deal cutting, another million came off. So I requested the remainder of that this year in our supplemental budget, and that was approved by joint appropriations. So the other 11 million to fill out that 20 million request right now is in the budget. In addition to that, the governor asked for a significant amount of money to deal with these issues as well as rangeland restoration issues as a result of the catastrophic fires we had in northeastern Wyoming primarily. It wasn't just there, but that was where we really saw that catastrophe. That money was to be a grant program, similar to these, where it would be re-granted through conservation districts, through weed and pest districts, where we'd have a priority system, just like I described with this one, where you've got a red, yellow, green. That has now become a loan program through the Business Council. I'm not sure that I think that's going to work as efficiently, as effectively, but that's where it stands right now on the fire relief money.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's just a looming issue throughout the western United States, and Wyoming is uniquely situated, I think. I love all that we do with this trust. And in fact, we trust the trust so much that we're asking you to manage some other things. But I think it is a big one, isn't it? It's an issue.
It is, Mr. Chairman, and if you go back in the day when I was getting my master's in range management, the mantra was our elevation precluded us from having cheatgrass. Well, I don't think any of us believe that. If you know anything about plant physiology, plants adapt very quickly. And that's exactly what's happened. Now areas that we thought were immune, I mean, subalpine areas have cheatgrass. We've got Medusa head, we've got ventonata. Those weren't something we brought in, they're something the wind brought. And I think we've taken the right approach, which is we do not want them to take hold to where we suddenly have a fire frequency in this state of every 2 years we're burning, and all you end up with is mineral soil with some cheatgrass on it, which is great for cows for about 2 weeks in the spring, and the rest of it, it's not good for anything. Well, chuckers and Huns, which came from Europe. But I think we do have the right mentality in this state that we are going to be aggressive and we're going to go after it. And the beauty is we've got areas where we can show that it has been effective. Sublette County is a good example of that. Their weed and pest got on top of this years ago, and we funded it, and they've taken out a lot of those areas where you had cheatgrass. You're getting to the seed source, to the point where you're never going to get rid of these. But if they don't become the dominant in that ecosystem, you can live with them. And we're now at kind of that tipping point on some of these where it could go from being a component of the ecosystem to being the dominant. I'm particularly concerned right now this year about what could happen in northeast Wyoming, because we're in a severe drought. Coming out of that, moisture at the right time can favor these species like you can't believe, and it just gives the natives a huge disadvantage. So treatment this year is going to be critical in those areas, as well as these are independent of fire. These are the areas we knew about that aren't burned. The burn money was to come back and supplement the areas that had the fire. So it is a high priority, it is a concern. The 11 million that's currently in the budget, we already know the areas where that's probably going to go. They're just a little behind the co-ops here, but the Bighorn Basin is an example. They're ramping up now, and I think you'll see the Bighorn Basin be next in line as we move forward this spring.
Thank you, Director, for taking a moment to pull off the road for a minute. I just think that's a big issue, and we need to stay on top of it. Appreciate all your work. Please continue.
The next one is basically the same as what I just did, except this is in western Wyoming. Again, a huge success story. This is Teton, Lincoln, Sublet, Uinta, and Sweetwater counties working together. They collaboratively came up, and when they did the site visit, this one was done by Chairman Meadows and Don Schramm. They sat down and said, where are we going this year? What are you going to need? You'll see their request was for 4.4 million and change. The grant is for 1.4. Their highest priority was Lincoln County. And that's particularly important because the wind comes out of the west. Treating that first, that helps you as you look downwind. This would be the Lincoln County component of that. As I said, the 11 million, clearly there's a remainder here to be filled. That will probably start to focus on Sweetwater and northern Uinta County. Sublet, Teton, and have been in the game longer. So this is a real credit to them. They said, look, we're not the priority right now. It's the ones that didn't have any funding, the ones that had less ability. Let's focus on them. Let's make sure they get the helicopter time. Let's make sure they get the chemical and they get the treatment done. And this is just a beautiful example of that collaborative spirit, the professionalism that they've exhibited. And you're seeing that now in Northeast and Southwest Wyoming. There's no question that's going to grow. We'll have more of that.
Any questions on the work going on the western front? Thank you, Director. Please continue.
Upper Green Fence, this is the second phase. This project we funded a year ago. It was at $250,000. That did not meet the threshold of the large project. That was what they could do in a year. 250 this year is what they can do in the coming year. That makes it a large project because collectively it's 500,000. This is fence modification. It's not complete replacement. It's modification of fences in areas where we know, based on collar data and based on observational data, trail cams and other, where those animals are trying to go through. And they have a high fidelity to those migration corridors and those movements. Antelope, not so much, but deer, very high fidelity. So it's just going in and strategically removing those barriers to movement for the primarily deer here, but also antelope as well. And elk take advantage of it, as do moose. This is we will probably have 2 more phases of this one before we're done, would be my guess. And
It's kind of interesting in that part of the world, Director, the antelope in particular just seem to be going higher and higher, and you find them clear up on the top of the peaks now. It's just been kind of interesting, and I grew up in that part of the world, and that wasn't always the case.
no, Mr. Chairman, it drove my father nuts. Till he died, he would growl about antelope being where they weren't supposed to be. But I reminded him when he was a little boy, he always told the story, you never saw a deer.
Yeah.
Because they ate them all, but
Yeah.
so things change. But and antelope are very different. If you talk to the biologists, their behavior is very different than deer. This has always been pretty focused on deer, but you do have that migration out of Teton County back down through Sublet that ends up at times in Sweetwater County. So it's both species, and I think that it's been a great effort, again, cooperative effort between the Conservation District and others. This one, I think in the bill, it's mislabeled as a game and fish project. So we'll need to correct that to be the Sublette County Conservation District. And as you work the bill, it's mislabeled in the bill, so they need an amendment there, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you for the heads up on that, Director. So that finishes up. Any questions, committee, on the Upper Green?
Next project is Wapiti Habitat. This is in Park County. On the North Fork, it's a combination, like many of our river projects are. Senator Hicks is certainly very familiar with these. Bank stabilization, going back up some of the tributaries and making sure that they're stabilized as well. It's to allow fish movement. It's allowed better, more efficient irrigation in an area. You can see the photos there where you put the river where the river needs to be, as opposed to doing things that force the river to do things it shouldn't do. And so it's a lot of bank erosion in there that needs to be addressed, and some structures that need to be altered for fish passage. Many of you have seen how those are done. A lot of it's with rock in this part of the world. Other places it's with tree revetments, but it's a really good project. Again, highly coordinated between Forest Service, Game and Fish, Trout Unlimited and others, and a good river project. We get a lot of them.
So Director, just real quickly on the river restoration work is just fascinating. And I've learned just how much advancement we've made on that front. It's absolutely remarkable how we can shore up, some of these river systems. But anyway, please continue.
Yeah, it is impressive, and I think the thing, that's been very gratifying to me, just because of what my biases are, is that we're now at the point where we're looking at whole systems. We're not saying, I want to keep the river in this channel, I want, build a ditch and concrete it up. You can do that with water. We're thinking more holistically about where should there be wetlands in conjunction with this system. And so you get wetlands that are wet in the spring and they dry up over the summer, but that's great waterfowl habitat. That's great wading bird and nest and shorebird habitat. So you see that kind of work going on, and it expands that green area. It's good for agriculture, it's great for tourism, it's good for fish, it's good for a whole lot of species. And that's how this project is. It's built the same way. That's just kind of become what we do now, is we do whole systems, not just the water running down.
Not just a channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Really wonderful to learn about all that. But, okay.
Mr. Chairman, the final project is Natrona Core Cheatgrass. This is in a core area for sage grouse. It's focused again on cheatgrass. This one is a game and fish project. That will probably grow. They're working in conjunction with Weed and Pest in Natrona County. Our site visit was with both. So again, it's very straightforward. It's a treatment of annual grasses, the monitoring that goes with it, and where needed, if we come back, if there's going to need to be seeding or other rangeland restoration, we would include that in the future. But Mr. Chairman, that is the large project bill. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that. The other two items which you have in front of you are for your information. One, this one is all the projects, the 77 that we looked at in 2024 and the ultimate disposition of those projects. The other is our cumulative sheet, which goes back to 2006. This is every project that we've ever funded and what's happened with it and the status of where that is. So we always try to make that available to you so that you can look back and see if there's something. If you find a phase 4 of the Baggs Headwaters, you can go back and see where 3, 2, and 1 were. But that's just for your edification, and if you ever have questions on any of those, you all know where to find me. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Director, just a salute to you and your right-hand help. Just fantastic, and you're always very helpful to get us the information we need to know exactly where we're headed. I did want to say that final project committee in Natrona County, that's probably the most important project that we're working on this. Just anyway, Director, any final thoughts on?
No, sir, appreciate all of your support and the work that you do. I would like to point out that I think, and I've said this many times before, Senator Boner has been chair of the select committee. You're the chair of the select committee. Senator Hicks has served on the select committee. It is a classic example to me of how the executive and legislative branch should be working together. Having that ability to see and be on the ground and make changes. And when Senator Boner was chairman, we were able to go in and say, hey, we need to fix things, and we did that. And that was through the select committee. So I know at times people are very critical of that process, but I'm here to tell you, I think it's incredibly valuable, and we value that when we get to go out in our August tours and see what's going on the ground and have you see that. So I'd encourage anybody who's interested to talk to the president about being on that. If you haven't been, and those who have, it's been very rewarding. Appreciate it.
Any other questions for the director? Director, if you could stick around, we'd appreciate it. We may have a question fired a little later. I want to get to anyone else who'd like to testify on Senate File 88, the large project funding bill. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to come forward and testify? Please. You know the process. If you would introduce yourself for the record, and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Holly Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. As Mr. Budd mentioned, we feel we're a valuable partner to the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust on these projects. And maybe to start off, if you'll indulge me, I'll just read off our mission statement, and I think you'll see how closely the focus of our work matches the work that they help get on the ground. The Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts provides leadership for the conservation of Wyoming's soil and water resources, promotes the control of soil erosion, promotes and protects the quality of Wyoming's waters, reduces siltation of stream channels and reservoirs, promotes wise use of Wyoming's water and all other natural resources, preserves and enhances wildlife habitat, protects the tax base, and promotes the health and safety and general welfare of the citizens of this state through a responsible conservation ethic. Many of these projects are aimed at treatments that work across the state to accomplish a number of things, including improving grasslands and shrubland ecotypes, water systems, and the landscape as a whole. Conservation districts are a well-trained staff. We have 34 individual conservation districts across the state, reaching from border to border. And these staff have specialized knowledge and are passionate about putting good projects on the ground. Where we are limited, though, is in funding mechanisms. And this is where Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust is a great partner for us, because we have the labor and the staff and the workforce and the connections on the ground to the private landowners. And so with the help of Wyoming Natural Resource Trust, we're able to put these great projects on the ground and make sure that we work with landowners to get these things implemented. I thank you for your time and for your support of these great projects. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Ms. Kennedy, thank you. Appreciate all the work that our conservation districts do. Really been enjoyable experience through the years to work with those folks. Committee, anything for the conservation district? Thank you. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Any other testimony on the large project funding bill that we're talking about this morning, Senate File 88? Anyone else in the room? Please come forward. Good morning, Mr. Garrett.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's my honor to be here and to represent the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. I've, of course, offered comments to this committee and to you as individual legislators many times over the years. And it's really a privilege to be doing so on behalf of the Greater Yellowstone Coalition this year. The Greater Yellowstone Coalition is one of those partners that in years past has contributed to the trust in ways that enable important projects. The Dry Piney Crossing is one that comes to mind, for example. Certainly in support of this year's iteration of the bill. The trust that you expressed in the trust is something that we have to encourage, I think, every year, renew every year, and let folks know how incredibly important this work is. Invasive species this year is deservedly top of the list, I think. As we see our landscape changing as a result of many factors, it's really important to get ahead of these invasives and to control them. We don't need to see our landscape turn into one that is similar to other states west of us. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions and certainly appreciate your support of the trust in this year's bill.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Always a pleasure. Appreciate you being here and partnering with us along the way. Anything for the Yellowstone Coalition? Thank you, Rich. Appreciate it. Anyone else like to comment on Senate File 88?
Mr. Chairman, you're needed in the other committee.
Thank you very much. Madam Vice Chair, I'm going to let you take over. And we don't have any streaming in, I don't believe, who want to testify. So
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
I'll leave it on a vote.
Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Move the bill. Would you like to go through page by page, or do we think we've covered that good enough? I think there was an amendment that was proposed.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, it looks like it's page 15, lines 16 and 17. I move that we strike Wyoming Game and Fish Commission and insert Sublette County Conservation District.
Motion to amend this on the bill? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay.
Are you opposed or are you?
All in favor?
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, I think we're adding that amendment in. And any other amendments to the bill?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chairman. I don't have any other amendments. I just wanted to give kudos again to Mr. Budd and the Natural Resource Funding Group. I mean, honestly, they're amazing. I was just looking through your projects. I was taken aback. I knew of some in my area even before I came into the Senate, but I'm just, it's been overwhelming what you guys have done with such a small workforce, and I really appreciate the fact that you collaborate so well with not only our state agencies, but our federal agencies and our private folks. And it's just, as far as I'm concerned, the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust is probably one of the shining examples of what we do here. And part of it is, a good part of it is due to our director here. So just wanted to say kudos to you.
Madam Chair, thank you for that, Senator Schuler. And I guess it'd be a good time to point out that in a couple of months, it will mark the 20th anniversary of the creation of the trust.
It's amazing. Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, that just always amazes me that we look at some of those previous legislators and directors, the state that had the vision, whether it's the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund or the Cultural Resource Trust Fund or the Wyoming Natural Resource Trust Fund, that has literally put away billions of dollars for future generations of the state of Wyoming. I think just sometimes we forget that we should recognize the gift that our predecessors gave to the state of Wyoming, and I am always thankful for that. But Madam Chairman, that's not why I turned my microphone on. Madam Chairman, I just want to make full disclosure that on one of these projects in there, I am an employee of that conservation district that is a recipient on that. I do not have any conflict of interest because it in no way affects my employment with that district or employment compensation in any form or fashion, and I will be voting on that, but I want that recorded for the record, that I've acknowledged that, and I do intend to vote because I have no direct affected interest associated with that, so.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. Is there any other discussion on the bill? No. Would like to move forward to vote on the bill?
Madam Chairwoman, this is a roll call vote for Senate File 88. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Schuler.
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Aye. I guess. Yeah, you didn't leave this.
Madam Chairwoman Jones.
Aye. Yeah. It's here somewhere.
So, Madam Chairman, who will be carrying this bill?
Who would like to carry this bill on the floor? Senator Hicks, would you like
Madam
to?
Chairman, because my employer do has a project on there, I do not feel comfortable presenting this bill on the floor. Preference would be one of the other members, I got your back.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I believe Chairman Landon intended to carry the bill as
okay.
chairman of the
All right,
select
that's good.
committee
We'll
as
put-
well, so.
We'll
If
put-
I can stand corrected if that's not, but and when I talked to him yesterday, I think that was his intent.
Well, since he had to leave, we will just put him right on there.
He's not here, so we're voting him in.
Thank you. Okay, I think we are moving on to the next bill, Senate File 91. Petroglyph, pictoglyph, historic inscription protection, sponsored by the Select Committee on Tribal Relations. Good morning. If you'll go ahead and introduce
morning.
yourselves.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Sarah Sheen. I'm the Deputy Director for State Parks Cultural Resources. And this is not our bill, but I recognize there's no one else in the room that was on the Tribal Relations Committee, so I'm happy to go over it for this committee.
Thank you for stepping up to help us.
So essentially, this is a really short bill that essentially just provides penalties for offenses or injury to rock art on state lands. And then it also provides for funding that would come to our agency to do survey, identification, and recordation of rock art on state, school, and institutional lands. There are currently no laws in Wyoming that really protect rock art on state land. On federal lands, there are laws, but on state land, there aren't. And so this committee, the Tribal Relations Committee did talk about this during the interim as something that was very important to them. I will say that we have provided the same handout that we provided to the Tribal Relations Committee, which covers the costs that are the appropriation that come along with this bill. And today I have brought with me two experts. So if you have really detailed questions, they're the folks that can answer those questions for you. Brian Beatles is the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer, and Spencer Pelton is the State Archaeologist.
Welcome. Thank you. Can you give us some more information? Either one of you can start.
I'm Spencer Pelton, the state archaeologist. Just in a general sense, rock art is one of Wyoming's more phenomenal kind of examples of cultural history. Both the Native American rock art in the state, which is extensive, kind of all over the place, but also the historic inscriptions in Wyoming that are associated with the Immigrant Trail era, which are found adjacent to the Oregon Trail all throughout the state. Unfortunately, people still vandalize this stuff a lot. In some of the studies we've done, we found inscriptions the year we've documented these rock art sites. People being out there shooting guns at them, inscribing their initials or dates into them. And, once these things are damaged like that, there's really no going back. They're kind of marred forever. There's not really a good way to restore these things back to their previous state. So I really feel pretty strongly that there needs to be some disincentive from doing that. These are kind of universally valued resources in this state, both for Wyoming's Native American populations, but also the rest of us. So I think this is a really good first step in both providing some penalties for people that do this, but also creating a baseline understanding of these resources on state lands, which we currently have a pretty tenuous grasp on what these resources are like. We know there's around 120 of these sites on state lands, but those sites are documented to various degrees of thoroughness. Some of them have been thoroughly documented. Some of them we just have a photo that somebody sent into the office 20 years ago. So by actually going out and getting a pretty thorough documentation of these things, we'll at least have a baseline understanding of which ones are heavily impacted by vandalism, which ones aren't, where do we need some increased protections or maybe monitoring of these things. And that's really what this piece of legislation sets up for us.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Yeah, a couple different questions. First off, I mean, I've been seeing this on the news. We get the Utah news, obviously, unfortunately, over on our side of the state. And they're having some big issues with this. And I was surprised to know that we didn't have any kind of law in place. So first of all, I think this is a great idea. The money that's appropriated to survey and document, is someone within the your staff, will they be in charge of that? Will it be state parks, or who's going to be involved with the actual surveying of some of the rock art?
Madam Chair and Senator Schuler, the intention is that we don't have a large staff in the state archaeologist's office. So while they'll be able to do some of the work, we would likely subcontract for folks to go out and do some of the field work as well, which is something that we do on a regular basis with archaeological field work.
Follow up, please. Sure, thanks. And then also, just kind of wondering what you guys think of this. I don't know, a misdemeanor, you know, not more than $750. Do you think that's appropriate, or do you think that's a little low or a little high, or do you have any thoughts on that in terms of what happens if we find somebody that's destroying or mutilating some of our rock art?
Madam Chair, Senator Schuler, I think it's a good start. My recollection was when they went through this, there was the option for penalties above that for a particularly egregious offenses. Not all of these offenses are created equally, in my mind. There's a big difference between a teenager messing around and putting their initials on a rock, and then somebody, you know, taking a high-powered rifle to a piece of rock art, or carving it off the side of the cliff for sale on the black market, for instance. It's happened before in this state. Yeah, I think it's a tough balance to strike. I don't want to be overly punitive against, you know, somebody that just kind of made a dumb mistake. On the other hand, I think we do want the option to pursue some of these more egregious offenses more aggressively.
You have one more question, Madam Chair? Thank you. Just lastly, I'm just interested in knowing, any one of you can maybe answer this. Where are we seeing most of the problems? You know, I think about it every time I go past Independence Rock. You know, they've of course cordoned that off, but are there certain places in the state where we're seeing more issues with, you know, the mutilations and destruction and that sort of thing? Anyone that wants to answer that?
Madam Chair, Senator Schuler, in going through some of the information we have on this, we haven't looked at this systematically or anything, but my impression is that it's kind of the mid-range sites, the sites that are not way in the back country, but the sites that are not front and center for everyone to visit. Those mid-range sites are really the ones that get the most vandalism. So Independence Rock, for instance, it doesn't really get much vandalism. It's interpreted as a publicly accessible site. And same with some of the Native American rock art sites too, like White Mountain Petroglyphs. It doesn't get a ton of vandalism now because people are aware that it's a bad thing to do there. And in the backcountry, people just don't get out there very much. But those ones in the middle where you can take a dirt bike out there, or you can get a Jeep out there or something, and it's just far enough away to feel a sense of anonymity, but not so far that it's inaccessible to get to. Those are the ones, my impression, are the ones that get hammered the most.
Thank you.
Senator Boner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just speaking of accessibility, I see no provisions in here for working with the landowners that may be affected, you know, by any sort of activity, you know, whether it be from the public or archaeologists going out and doing these surveys. So just a little discussion about that, especially if it's, say, in a school section doesn't have public access to it. I mean, do you imagine a circumstance where you say, hey, we're supposed to go check out one of your school sections to the landowner, we need to access your property, and they say no. And just the background here, we've had some actually difficult experiences in Converse County where artifacts have been used as a tool against industrial development, oil and gas development in particular, and also used, I think, to suppress the private property rights of the private landowners in that area. So just want to learn more about that, especially the surveys. I get really nervous when we start, you know, surveying just for the sake of surveying. There are negative regulatory implications for that within the federal regulatory scheme. So maybe a general discussion about that. Hopefully, we've thought about that before this point. But how do you look at accessing perhaps isolated parcels? Since you're mentioning the, apparently that's what we're concerned about, is things that aren't quite as accessible or well-known. So a little discussion there about property rights.
Madam Chair and Senator Boner, I guess I'll start on this, and then if either of these two have something to add, I'll let them. I certainly understand the concern about having access, working with private landowners to have access and not kind of overstepping, right? Senator Boner, you and I have talked about this in the past. Certainly understand those issues. I think that I would say right up front that we haven't really talked about this in depth, but we would work with state lands, one, to make sure that notifications go out to any private landowners that we would need, access to their property to get to the state property. And certainly be very cognizant of not overstepping or overreaching where the survey goes. I mean, this is intended to simply be on state land. And really, this is just about the rock art. This is not about, the artifacts that are on the ground. I mean, yes, if we notice something, it's probably, that's, right below a cliff face, we're going to probably document that that's there, but we're not going to go far outside of that, that cliff face and start looking at things that that don't pertain to the rock art that's being studied. But do either of you have more? Go ahead.
Madam Chair and Senator Boner, just a point of clarity. This bill does not support a proactive search for additional rock art sites. This is just known sites that have been found in previous surveys on state lands. So people are not going to be wandering aimlessly around these sections. They're going to be very targeted to very specific places. So hopefully that would alleviate some of the concerns of landowners that are providing access to these parcels if that needs to occur, that this is going to be in a very specific place on a very specific timeline, going to be in and out, and then it'll be done.
Yes, Senator Boner.
So it sounds like if we had an amendment that would limit these surveys to previously documented sites and publicly accessible state lands, would that not inhibit what your intent is, I guess?
Senator Boner, I think we need to clarify what publicly accessible means. If that means publicly accessible and that the landowner is granted permission to access these parcels through their lands, or that the parcel is actually accessible from like a public road.
I was thinking from a public road, that's usually what that means. But yeah, obviously, I mean, I could imagine a circumstance where you would, the landowner say objects, say they don't want you out there. And I mean, that give me lots of heartburn and say, no, actually we are, because there's a state law that says we have to. Those are the sorts of concerns I have with this bill, Madam Chairman. And so I think that it needs quite a bit of work. That Senator Higgs said, we were both working together, was it 6, 7 years ago on this issue. And there's property rights implications and there's regulatory implications for our oil and gas industry, at least in my neck of the woods. And mind you that, when you identify these sites, all of a sudden through the federal process, that's not just say our Wyoming tribes that get notified. There's 13 tribes throughout the region that all of a sudden have a say in development on private property in places like Commerce County. That includes tribes from South Dakota that have been known to associate with extremist groups who want to end oil and gas development. So I think we do have to be very careful here. And I certainly, agree with the intent of the bill. I don't support destroying any of these sorts of artifacts, to be clear, but we have to be careful about this, Madam Chairman. So I'll be working on some amendments.
Senator Hicks?
Madam Chairman, the idea that somebody would be crossing private property and just note something is already a violation of statutes. We have a statute, it's called criminal trespass, to collect data, and they would be subject to prosecution under that law. So I think that needs to be made explicitly clear that you don't notify or don't record anything on private property. I share some of the concerns with my colleague. I don't think that, I think we absolutely have to put a provision in here that nothing in this act conveys a right of trespass across private properties, because there is. So we've dealt with this with the university on data collection from a number of species, and it's an obligation of the agency to contact those landowners and seek permission. And that's kind of been the standard to get to those isolated state sections. And so I think we need to just make sure that this does not convey a right of trespass across without permission of those landowners. A couple of questions I had on this is if we're already going out there and doing these sites, well, first let me back up, because this come from tribal relations. Was there any discussions, Sarah, with during the time that to look at part of the funding associated with from either BIA, or I know the tribes have their own tribal archaeologists and stuff, and so what was the discussion about using some of the either funding from BIA to do some of this, or seek funding from BIA, or what is our partnership with the tribal SHPO offices or archaeologists to try to partner with them to maybe do some of this work instead of just state shoulder in this work? So that'd be the first question.
Madam Chair and Senator Hicks, I probably will ask these two to weigh in on this, but I know that those groups, at least the tribal archaeologist was present at the meetings. The TIPO was present at some of these meetings and did weigh in on this, but I would, no. So it sounds like there wasn't much discussion about that yet. Certainly something that could be explored. And I just wanted to say too, on the any amendments that would be brought to clarify what kind of data is going to be collected on land and private property owner rights, how that all works together. I think that if we get with state lands and ourselves, I think we can help draft some amendments.
Madam Chairman, just another follow-up too, is if we're out there and we're looking at some of these, was there any thought given as to recording arboglyphs while we're out there at the same time with either a contractor or internal staff? You know, some of these are, as these trees age out and gone, we lose them. And so why wouldn't we do that?
Yep, Madam Chair.
From an area that has more arboglyphs than anywhere in the state of Wyoming.
Madam Chair and Senator Hicks, it wasn't part of the conversation that came up, but I do agree with you that there are arbor glyphs out there that probably do need to be recorded. And it would just need to be something, I think the way that this bill is drafted, it is very specific to rock art, petroglyphs. It would need to be probably added to the bill.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I understand this because it came from tribal relations, but there are other, what I would say, most of those arboglyphs are still eligible for recording, and it's part of our historical component that it doesn't make any sense to me to just go out there to look at the tribal component and look at those early settlers. And like I said, in my area, they're very prevalent down there, but we're losing them.
Yeah.
And there's no record is once that tree dies and that's gone. And if you're out there doing this already, we should be looking for this.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, yes, I think that would be really valuable. I do think that we would have to take a look at, that handout we gave to you, which is the cost estimate. It would definitely change that if we included arbor glyphs as well.
Director, it looks like you have 120 sites identified. Are those sprinkled somewhat throughout the state, or are they concentrated in certain areas? And I was wondering, is there any way for you to provide a map identifying where most of those will be?
Madam Chair, if you look at the second page of the handout, we did create a map showing the locations of those sites. So there's a lot of the historic inscriptions are located, as you would expect, right along the immigrant trails. There's clusters of Native American rock art in Fremont County that are associated with an especially active archaeologist that kind of proactively sought these sites out to document them. And then there's just kind of a smattering of sites throughout the rest of the state. I will note that really the Wind River Basin, the Bighorn Basin are especially rich areas for Native American rock art, and so there's a bit of an overrepresentation of rock art in those places.
Thank you. Sorry for that.
No problem.
Any other questions, committee? Senator Hicks?
Madam Chairman, not so much a question, but I think you're going to run into a buzzsaw when you get to the Appropriations Committee. So just a little FYI. When you put in your request under Section 2, and it's not the dollar amount, part of it's just the way you've structured it. And I mean, if I'm, as an ex-appropriator that sat there for a long time and I see things that say that we're either going to do it internally or through a consultant, means you don't know what you're going to do yet. If you do it internally, it would come through your 100 series in your budget. If you're going to hire a consultant, that's a 900 series budget item. And so, because this will be re-referred, Mr. Chairman, to the Appropriations Committee, I think you really need to start to figure out how you're going to do this and then be able to address those questions when that comes up.
Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, I believe that our budget department, they put together a budget note on this recently, intending for my office's survey section to do the vast majority of this work. Our survey section is other funded, so they rely on agreements, contracts, that kind of thing. And then a small portion of this would be conducted by Brian's office. They would be the ones responsible for processing the data that's collected in the field, entering that into our state historic resources database, and really the back end of this whole process.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Madam Chairman. By just trying to, as an FYI, you think we're tough.
Madam Chair and Senator Hicks, I very much appreciate that. I know your experience on joint appropriations tells you that we need to be very clear about where the funding is placed into a budget, where it's going to be expended from. So
Absolutely.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Committee, any other questions? Okay, thank you. Do we have any other testimony? Please come up. Please introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Jason Crowder, Interim Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. With me, I have Cody Booth. He's our Assistant Director for our Trust Land Management Division. Appreciate this opportunity to speak in front of you about this topic. Honestly, this is kind of a dark area of statutes as far as trust land management is concerned. We don't see a lot of action in here. What we have typically done is developed a set of rules out of this act of statutes for fossil removal for scientific purposes or for commercial purposes, but haven't really talked about the protection of petroglyphs or any of the other sensitive artifacts that are out there. So this is an important topic. I think also that Dr. Pelton talked really well about why this is important. There is already some I guess, parts of this existing statute that talk about protection of artifacts and the removal of those artifacts and how they belong to the state of Wyoming and how the Board of Land Commissioners is involved in that removal by a permit or a lease or something like that. But if you remove those artifacts without that permit, you are subject to a fine, a $25 fine, up to a $100 fine. So it's rather nominal, and I'm certain that those artifacts bring more than that if you don't tell anybody about it, so it's not really a deterrent. What this does is increase that, not just removal, but damage, and increase that fine to $750 or not more than 6 months in jail. So it's a good addition for the protection. Again, we haven't seen a lot of use of this statute, mainly because nobody's come to us. Nobody said, hey, we'd like to damage your artifacts out on state land, so can I have a permit for that? Obviously, the Board of Land Commissioners wouldn't look favorably upon that, wouldn't issue that permit, but there was no mechanism to fine or to otherwise dissuade somebody from going out and doing that negative work. Some of the questions that have been brought up as far as access and how we manage state lands, I want to just take a quick minute to try to answer those again for the committee. Obviously, the majority of these lands already have grazing leases on them. And inside of that grazing lease is a provision for access. It's to the Office of State Lands and Investments. It's for reasonable access and it's for administrative purposes. And it's intended to allow us to get to our land so that we don't have an isolated parcel that we can't manage and that the beneficiaries have an isolated asset out there. I don't think it goes as far as talking about us allowing other users, specifically other leased users like oil and gas, to follow the same access that we would have to those parcels. But it may allow somebody working on our behalf, like the State Parks Department, to follow that same route. And the reason I think they're working on our behalf is we do have a lot of administrative reasons for knowing what resources are out there and what resources need to be protected. The state of Wyoming and the state legislature has made these resources important. They have said that they're property of the state and they can't leave the state. When we do other leasing out there, including grazing leasing, we want to know that that activity doesn't harm that resource that the state has made important. When we do leases for oil and gas or any other commercial type venture, we put stipulations on those leases that they have to protect that artifact. They may have to work with the State Historic Preservation Office to protect that artifact. If we don't know what's out there, that is a blanket protection that SHPO has told us there's something important out there. We don't quite know what it is. We don't know the extent, and we don't know exactly where it is yet. We just know that there might be something out there. So the stipulation covers all 640 acres, which means that that additional user has to pay attention to all 640 acres when they're doing their development activities. And that's a stipulation that we put on that lease. So it's a requirement that they abide by, otherwise they lose that lease. I think it's important to know exactly where and to the extent these artifacts are or these pictographs are, so that we can help our other users, our extractive industries, focus their development efforts away from it. They're not totally worried about the full 640 acres, but maybe they're worried about 15 acres, 40 acres, something like that. So that's one of the administrative reasons we feel we will be a good partner and we'll get a lot of good information out of this effort as they go through and do their studies. We're going to work to whatever length we need to with SHPO to allow them access. Part of our current rules is that everybody has access if they can reach the parcel to do surveys, unless they do something negative and the board takes away that access. But part of that is a notification process. It's Chapter 16 of our rules. They have to notify our lessees that they're going to go out there and do something. And it's not necessarily to get access to the parcel. We're expecting them to do that on their own, but that they don't have a negative impact to the existing operation. So if they're lambing, we don't want them driving through the lambing field right when that's occurring. So the lessee and whoever's going out there to do that survey have some communication conversation before the activity occurs. And we expect to use that same process here to make sure that that's documented and that the conversation has happened. So with that, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Any questions? Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Just one question. You answered one of the questions I was going to ask. So who has to notify? And it's up to the person that's doing, if they're doing the survey, the state lands, they've got to notify the lessee. Do they also have to notify you as well?
Madam Chair, yes, that document will come into our office as well.
Okay.
Yep.
And then also, so the surveying that they're doing, if I could follow up, if that's all right. The survey that they're doing, it basically talks about known petroglyphs and pictographs. If they're out there surveying and they happen to find, oh, there's something else out here we didn't know was here, is that going to be a problem either for state lands or for you guys to just be able to document, oh my gosh, there's something else out here? It's not one that we knew about, but where would that end up?
Madam Chair, Senator Schuler, that's a great question. Whatever they need to go out and do, they can do. Like I mentioned before, it's good for us to know what else is out there. So if they find something additional on state lands, we don't find that to be a negative, and we don't want to hide that. Obviously, like I said before, the legislature has made these artifacts important, and we have to pay attention to them by statute. And so we don't see that as a negative at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chairman, So as I read through this creates a new statute specifically for prehistoric ruins. And so is it the same process? Because, see, we're intermingling things like artifacts and arbor glyphs and all, which we wouldn't have to do arbor glyphs under this statute because it does specific historic ruins. What about all these other cultural resources out there? Anything over 50 years old is eligible for historic preservation. I believe that's the threshold. But so what about old, homesteader buildings and other things and stuff? How does the State Land Board handle that? Is that all still under Chapter 16?
Madam Chair, Senator Hicks, to go out and do the survey of that, yes, it would be all under Chapter 16. And as I said, this is just specific to Statute 36-1-116. We go all the way back to 36-1-114. And inside of that, it talks about all of the important things that we need to pay attention to. And we don't know, as the State Land Office, what those are. Artifacts, I'm going to butcher all these words, so I apologize for all of that. But the important artifacts that are out there, or anything else that are out there that are important to the State Historic Preservation Office, we don't have the expertise to understand if they're important, how they're important, and what they are. We rely on them. And as you just heard, they're very short-staffed as well, so they don't have a great inventory of all of that stuff. So anything that they can provide back to us, when we're telling our additional users, you need to watch out for this, more information is better in that conversation. So whatever they find, historic farmsteads that they feel are important for protection, that is good information for us.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thanks. Senator Broner?
Yeah, thank you. Just a little bit more questions about your process for accessing state lands through private property. And even, in the circumstance where, say, maybe that lessee is using that pasture, say, for lambing. What happens if and when the landowner says, actually, we need you to wait till July, and the archaeologist, for whatever reason, says, no, we have to go now? Well, how do you resolve that conflict if there is a disagreement about the terms of the access? What does that process look like?
Madam Chair, Senator Boner, that's a great question. It hardly ever comes up. When they have a conversation together, they find a way to work through it. I don't recall anything, but possibly back when a lot of preemptive seismic work was going on for oil and gas before the Niobrara Shale became a thing they wanted to develop. We had a lot of those. It was a very fast, immediate work, and they had a thumper truck right there, and they couldn't really move around for timing. We had to have a lot of those conversations on the ground to mediate that impact. And that's what we did, is we mediated the impact through conversation. Some of it resulted in financial benefit to the lessee through a surface impact payment. We received some of that payment as well. I think in every case, I don't recall a case where there was a situation where the lessee was just rolled over for access for a survey. We've been able to successfully mediate all of those issues that have come up, and either they went through a region and then came back and hit our state land if that was the way the development occurred and it worked right. But again, part of that was monetary, and that was a part of the process too.
Right, I think that's pretty standard. I mean, if you're accessing, especially if you're going through somebody's private property, even to the state lease, there's almost always some sort of compensation for that. Even if it's a daily fee for accessing the property, and obviously the rules of how you do so have a huge impact on the lessee. And for the record, Madam Chairman or Mr. Chairman, we have had negative experiences in Commerce County where not in this context, but in more of an industrial development context, where the individuals doing the work basically told the lessees to pound sand. I guarantee you, Mr. Crowder did not hear about it, and said, this is state land, and we're going to do what we want. And so, that's real life circumstance, not necessarily what we hear about down here in our capital. So, like I said, just have a lot of concerns about this Section 2 in particular. It sounds like there's set guarantees in state lands process, but that could have an impact on leaseholders.
Any other questions? Would you like to provide more testimony?
My name is Joseph Martinez. I'm from Fremont County. Thank you for your time. I just want to give a quick testimony in support of this bill, at least for educational purposes and preserving it for future people to be informed about the petroglyphs and pictographs that are in our state and how that can relate to the Native American culture the prehistoric culture that was here before settlers came. I benefited greatly from the class that I took in college in relation to this, to petroglyphs and pictographs. My aged professor, I believe, did a lot of work for documenting and surveying both on public and private land in Fremont County, and I believe in other areas of the state as well. I can't testify for sure on that. But he was very knowledgeable about the rock art that was in the area and passed that on to his students and to his associate professors as well. I think that the preservation of this rock art is really important for the future. My only concerns about this bill is the appropriations, and I'm glad that it was already brought up. And I appreciate one of the committeemen's concerns about the private ownership as well. And I would like to see that kind of cleared up. But I think preserving this for the future is a great idea, and I would like to see work done for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Thank you. You have any other testimony? Thank you. We get to hear from you twice today.
Lucky me. Madam Chair, members of the committee, again, Richard Garrett with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. I'll be brief. Our Deputy Conservation Director, Charles Wolf Drimmel, has followed this issue through the interim. He is based in Bozeman, so I don't believe attended any of the Tribal Relations Committee meetings in person. But I have been asked to express our strong support for this bill. Certainly the conversation, though, has been robust and proves to me the value of and the truth of how we work better together and produce better results as we work together. Private property rights in many contexts, and particularly in this legislative session, are vital to be considered and respected. I think that the legislature needs to protect private property rights and to defend private property rights and not to enable diminishing of private property rights. The penalty is something that Senator Schuler has brought up, and I too believe, and I think the Greater Yellowstone Coalition believes, in moderation. And yet at the same time, we find ourselves in a world where there is incentive to do destruction, to artifacts that are important to our understanding of our own history, of the history of people that came before us, and to not try to disincentivize that activity to the appropriate extent, in a sense, only incentivizes it. To stray just a little bit, here in Cheyenne, there's been an epidemic of motorcycle accidents and deaths in this last year. And at least a couple of them, I've been told by the mayor of Cheyenne, happened when TikTokers pulled up alongside police officers and offered an obscene gesture, hoping to be chased and then to film it live for display on social media. And one of those people actually perished as a result of that activity, even though the police did not pursue them. So, the incentives are out there. People look to find followers, and then they look for commercial reimbursement because they're influencers and that sort of thing. This behavior of destroying our artifacts cannot be incentivized. So With that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but again, I want to emphasize, I truly appreciate the recognition of private property rights and how important they are in this state. So,
Thank you, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you.
Any questions, Cindy?
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee.
And we don't have anyone online for this?
Correct, Madam Chairman.
Committee, I know we do have one proposed amendment in front of us.
Do you, Madam Vice Chairman, do you want a motion on the bill? Because I'll make it.
Certainly.
I'll move the bill.
All right, that's, go right ahead.
So, Madam Vice Chairman, just by way, just a little more discussion on this. And I'm sorry I had to step out, but, I'm wondering, I wonder about things like Independence Rock and Devil's Gate, all the other things that we've got out across the state, that really matter to us. And at least at Independence Rock, we've got that well fenced off and well taken care of. And, but I think this is a good step in the right direction. I just wonder if it encompasses everything that we need to do. And I appreciate our state lands folks, thinking with us as we go along. We're probably going to run into some things that we need to continue to be aware of. But I think this is a really good effort. I support the bill.
Senator Boner?
Madam Chairman, once again, I want to reemphasize that I do support the concept. I've been a little critical of the Section 2 and want to offer some amendments so we can all move forward here, if that's okay.
Yes,
And,
please.
a little bit of leeway and, maybe this will be somewhat conceptual if we need to be, but let's just start off page 2, line 15. Just add a new sentence. And really, it probably could be anywhere in Section 2.
15.
Say, nothing shall be construed, nothing in this section shall be construed to allow access to private property without the consent of the property owner. Or something like that, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Vice Chairman, I wonder to the bringer of the amendment if just the word permission might be appropriate, then you could bring in financial compensation with that permission. Just a thought.
Sure, yeah, I mean, it's, whatever, I guess, like I said, the terms of access are just as important as, or more important than the compensation, in my opinion. So whatever wording we need there, I think we get the gist that you need landowner permission to access private property.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Senator Hicks?
So I don't think we should put this in Section 2 in the appropriation,
Okay.
because that deals strictly with the appropriation. And so let's assume that the Appropriations Committee, for whatever reason, decide to strike the appropriation. It wouldn't provide those protections, assuming that the agency come up with another source of funding to provide the protections that, so, Mr. Chairman, what I suggest is we probably would want to incorporate another, a new Section 2 and then renumber. And under that new Section 2, and I'll just throw some draft language out there that would say, nothing in this act conveys the right of trespass across private lands. But you don't want to put that in the appropriation. So-
They'd make section 2,
So
section 3.
that would be a friendly amendment to my colleague's amendment.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, I think that makes sense, just to be clear that the trespass concerns are dealing exclusively with the program contemplated in Section 2 with the appropriation. So, yeah, as long as however we want to structure it, that's fine. But that concern is not related to the new language in Section 1, just to be clear.
Could you
Madam
state
Vice
that
Chairman,
again?
I wonder if our two senators could maybe work on that language with our legal
We
staff.
can, Mr. Chairman.
Rather than trying to do something on the fly on a standing committee amendment that may not Does that make sense?
Yeah, we can do
Maybe-
that as a
maybe
committee
we
of the
do
whole
that.
amendment,
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman.
that might be the way to go, you guys. Madam Vice Chair, I appreciate that discussion. I would move the proposed amendment that our attorneys have provided to us.
Did everyone get a chance to review that? And is everyone in favor of adopting the proposed amendment? All in favor?
Madam
ahead.
Chair, could I just
Discussion.
discuss, just one thing, or ask a question, that's all right? Because we talked a little bit about this when you were gone. And I'm assuming that you brought this because you thought the fine was too high? And that's why you brought this additional amendment? Because
So,
it lowers it, correct?
Madam Vice Chairman, this was actually provided at the request of our legal staff.
Oh, okay.
So even though my name is at the bottom, please don't blame me for this one.
And it does say, not less than $25, not more than 100. Still, it's in there, they could be thrown in jail for not more than 6 months, so. I just wondered why your thought was of amending that, but now that it's the LSO, they know better, so.
Mr. Chairman, so to answer the senator's question, so it leaves the language in the proposed bill exactly as it is. That says, except as provided in subsection D and E. So E still stands in the bill. It just says for these criminal activities, there's a higher penalty. So if that just helped clarify that.
Yes.
So the bill still stands, but we needed to include it.
Yeah, thanks, Senator.
It's more of a technical correction for drafting than anything else.
I see it now.
Any other discussion on this amendment? All in favor of adopting this amendment to the bill? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've added that in. Any other amendments proposed?
Madam Chairman, and again, I think it's more goes to the technical issue. So on page 1, into the title on line 4, it says requiring the surveys of petroglyphs and petrographs on state lands. So what I'm cognizant of the fact that we don't want to put an absolutely unfunded mandate on the agency. And so I think the language that we would want to put in there is providing for. If we leave that word and and assuming that the Appropriations Committee did something, it puts a duty on the agency. It could be an unfunded mandate. And so,
Any more discussion on that proposed amendment? All in favor of adopting that amendment? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay? Okay, we've added, did you get that? Okay. Any other amendments to the bill? Senator Boner.
Okay, since we're about to become the Secretary Judiciary Committee, I'm wondering if page 1, line 15, do we need to add a knowingly, any person who knowingly breaks? So you can imagine circumstances, maybe somebody's out hunting and they miss and ends up destroying, or something of that nature. But then again, that may be just inherent in when you're talking about a misdemeanor. So I'm a little rusty from my judiciary days, and I'm wondering if that's a topic of discussion or whether that's just taken care of in the way that we conduct the law.
Mr. Chairman, if I may inquire to my colleagues, did you spend some time on the Judiciary Committee?
Madam Vice Chairman? No, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. You know, there again, we have some legal friends upstairs. We might, probably a good catch and a good thought, Senator. That would be my take, but
I'll add that to the list.
yeah, I think maybe
You take care of that
caution
all
is
at
the
once.
better part of valor, or whatever that saying is, so.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, to a certain degree, it makes absolute sense to me from a standpoint, you could have a little Boy Scout troop out there and, you know, they may be climbing on something that they probably shouldn't have, but now they're gonna get obviously,
Throwing a
your
job.
county prosecutor has a little discretion, but sometimes they don't use it very well. So,
Okay, so I think that sounds like something you're going to add in later on. Any other amendments? It's your pleasure. Are we ready for roll call?
Question?
Oh,
Yeah, not to belabor, I'll be a no today since we haven't amended it, but I look forward to getting to a yes soon.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for Senate File 91. Senator Boner?
No.
Senator Hicks?
no.
Senator Jones?
Aye.
Senator Schuler?
Aye.
Chairman Landon?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 3 ayes, 2 noes.
Thank you. And that concludes our committee meeting today. Chairman?
Madam Vice Chairman, thank you for taking over today. I just want to throw out committee real quickly for future reference as we look forward to Tuesday. Don't be surprised if we begin to get some bills that aren't necessarily related to travel, recreation, and wildlife. That's what you get for being so qualified. No, this is a great committee, and I wouldn't blame the president. He's already given a heads up that he's going to probably expect a lot out of us, and that's fine. So we'll move forward.
So are you saying then it's good that we've been on judiciary?
Either good or bad, whichever way you want to look at it.
Mr. Chairman,
By the-
before we adjourn, just for your edification, it was a unanimous vote that you're gonna carry the large project funding bill.
Yeah.
Just
Well-
thought we should pass that on to you before you
Let me
stand
just,
up and.
committee,
Yes.
just remember, you can't pack a whole lot of weight on a Shetland pony, so be careful with what you do. Sarah, back there,
Voluntold
I just
today.
wanted to recognize one of my fellow members of the Wayfinding and Historical Exhibit Committee, one of those responsible for these beautiful images that are in our public meeting rooms.
They're
And
nice.
what a great member of our committee you have been. Thank you for all your work. We still have some things to finish up, so look forward to working with you on that, Sarah. Thank you for being here, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just make one observation on the last comment. You can